Time fuck. The YouTube algorithm isn't going to like that. Not that it's gonna give me money because I'm using Death Grips' Annie Bonnie as the intro, but who cares? Welcome to a new series. What it all means. A series where we try to get the full picture on certain beautiful moments in gaming. Well known or little known. Doesn't matter. Follow me, your host, Cranciosis, as we travel together into the lines and dialogue that move us. And, as it will be for any of these episodes, spoilers ahead. On today's episode, we will be looking into the game Time Fuck by Edmund McMillan. More specifically, the game over screen at the very end of the game. I needed to be specific about that, as this game doesn't have a death system like normal. There are no live numbers. You just simply reset at the beginning of the stage. Whenever you need to reset because a puzzle has been softlocked, your character does, in fact, kill themselves. Something that we should mention. It's almost canon for there to be multiple player characters. At one of the endings, we get a bit of dialogue that almost leads to some real-life reasoning behind this. And I quote, "When I was 4, my mother put me inside of a cardboard box with a black marker. I drew on the walls for days, making a world I felt was much more interesting than the one I currently subscribed to. I called a small hole in the front of it, well, more of a flap, that would let me peek out into the world to see how things were going. This is also how my mom kept me fed. When I turned 10, my mom got me a much larger box, and with my black marker, I drew my future. I can't see what I'm drawing, Mom. It's too dark in here," I said. "Turn on the light," she said. When I turned on the light, a chill went up my spine when I saw the bodies of my future selves covering the walls of the box, scratching in their sleep, whispering secrets, each one wandering in the darkness in the world I created, the world I had made for myself. I turned off the light and asked for another box and a different marker. But that isn't what we're looking at today. That, I feel, is only context for the game over screen we're going to be looking at. The first line reads, "This wall of text means nothing." If you don't know Edmund McMillan, you're in for a ride. Time Fuck is quite the treasure, located still on Newgrounds, but also within the Basement Collection. A game where Edmund has been on record stating the inspiration came from his high school reunion. 10 years.
A lot of the themes of the game were centered around I had my 10-year high school reunion.
Where he realized that his aspirations, the ones that had fueled his desire to prove his classmates wrong, meant little to nothing.
The whole thing was run by this girl in school who I remember to this day told me that I will never be a success at life because I'm so antisocial. And I just wanted to go and show her up in some way.
He noted that most of his classmates were sad, drunk, depressed, all because of limitations they had placed on themselves. About as much as the basic rules others set in place for you, trapping themselves as the same person, only older. Edmund had been able to separate himself from his classmates, becoming successful in the video game marketplace, with little more than the help of a couple people. Time Fuck itself was only ever made by a total of 3 people. He had found inspiration from moments of his life and has, in multiple cases, been successful in obscuring reality for fiction. in his minigames. Yet, in Indie Game the Movie, even he questions whether or not he too is in a box he simply cannot see. The more you read, the more you realize that you will follow any direction. To understand the deeper meaning to this, we should consider a specific theory. Repeating events, whether they happen or we think they happen. Henceforth, we will use the term historic recurrence. And we should look also at the game itself. Within Fcuk, our player character, Steve, is tricked into, or coerced into entering a box, which it contains the length of the game, a time flux. While in the game, we go about switching through dimensions in order to solve puzzles and progress through this looping time zone, only to end up in the same thing to a different previous version of ourselves, only to repeat the events in a slightly different way, still trapped by the same limitations or guidelines or rules or pain, as if we are, for the most part, doomed to make the mistakes we have already made or someone else has made for us. Regardless of the ending or your choices, you still coerce a previous version of Steve into entering the box, regardless of the time spent doing so. Of course, maybe it's not all historic recurrence. Perhaps we aren't doomed to repeat the mistakes that have already been made. Maybe Donald Trump is a Nazi. And maybe I won't eat the rich. Maybe we aren't on a ticking time bomb of 10 to 15 years before the Nazis try to take over America like they did with Germany. I'd like to hope that historic recurrence is fake, or that it's just something we can stop. Although it is well documented that unless you're extremely lucky, like in the case of Motion Twin, the video game industry continues to do historic recurrence on itself as a very, very unfair, cannibalistic, and ruthless marketplace. Young artists, programmers, directors, and voice actors still seem interested in the prospect of being someone, making something, maybe they're unrelated, or eventual outcome. For those of you who do not know Motion Twin is the company that developed and released Dead Cells, a company made up of only 7 people. And it's not their only game, as they've been making games for 19 years. However, at first glance at their website, you would think of them more as a political statement. And with what we are exploring with Edmund McMillan, it is no wonder. On the first page, we can read, "We don't have a boss." I quote, "We're all equal, and we wanted that to show, both in the way our games are made and in the way we organize ourselves. So we chose to create a cooperative company. Everyone has a say. We all take home the same salary." The next section reads, "No newcomers." 19 years. That's a long time in the indie game space, but we've got no intention of stopping now. Third reads, 7 people. Our small team make one game at a time. We've made over 150 games ranging from 1-week game jams to year-long behemoths. Titles like My Brute, Die Tonight, and Mush. That was us. The fourth reads, "No boring days. We make games to fulfill ourselves and be happy. When we go to work every morning, we love the feeling of booting up a new game for the first time. It's the same feeling we get when we start a new project. We live and breathe this stuff." It's not to say that Edmund McMillan is for or against this type of setup. I'm sure he too lives and breathes video game design. But I don't think it is to say that happy is what he feels at this point. You are simply looking for answers. In another interview, Edmund McMillan is talking about his influence on the marketplace. Here, he begins to fight back the urge to cry.
And to think that I could make something that could have an impact on this kid, even creatively, into thinking, hey, I know 2 guys made this. Like, maybe I can make something too. It's just cool.
I can't help but feel that most of these things are related. In some interviews, it seems that even the games that Ed McMillan most famous for, like Super Meat Boy or The Binding of Isaac, ones that most people praise him for, he seems to consider them not good, or downright vampiric to his life, and further his goals. And in a clip, we see in this clip, we can see the true main monster, the demon within the video game industry.
I'm like in a concentration camp. If you can't get the work done, then the past 2 years are basically worth nothing.
And even though you have been told there will be no answers here, you continue to read. It's as if I've been called out on this one. As if even I am reading too far into this simple dialogue, but continue I do. Red Button Studios, Sonic the Hedgehog, CD Projekt Red, Cyberpunk, Bethesda, Skyrim, Hello Games, No Man's Skies, 3D Realms, Duke Nukem Forever, BioWare, Mass Effect Andromeda, Atari, E.T., Sonic Team, Sonic the Hedgehog 2006. The commonalities between these games are far more than one might regularly consider. Each were famously released before they were finished, and most were all pushed back before release, sometimes multiple times. Deadlines have been a large downfall to the video game industry. The stress, overworking, underpaying, and all-around toxic environments of this capitalistic industry are little more than the Mad Max-style wasteland. And, on theme with everything else so far, it has to do with time. Following the basic rules set in place by the people around you. There are several interviews and articles about first-hand accounts into the insanity that are the deadlines, and further, there are companies that do well that shut down because, well, AAA studios require investors to pay the CEOs to do something, I don't know, and help the staff. But the stress is terrible, and investors love deadlines. Many people even now struggle simply to make ends meet with the repetitious everyday life, doing the same thing over and over, while feeling like it amounts little to nothing. And maybe it does, and maybe it doesn't matter. The difference between those companies and Motion Twin and further indie developers is the way they are treated. The workers in the time frames require you to feel trapped, with not enough money to leave and with enough money to stay. At this point, I feel Ed had started to be affected by these types of time frames. The demon, if you will, had affected him and maybe still does to this day. The path you're on will only lead to an end. When following your own dream, capitalism forces you to take your dream as the most cost-effective path. In a clip by Edmund McMillan being brought to tears, is he crying because he feels like he's succeeded, or because he's deterred from his own dream, never able to fully be happy with his own creations, as they have become little more than products, stealing from his life the time put in them, and being unable to fully see them fleshed out. As we look back towards the ending of the game, we should consider the implications of Steve being his own worst enemy. This text will stop. Another idea to consider is OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder, namely the compulsion to repeat actions regardless of outcome, a repetitious and vicious cycle that many live with, never actually getting help, and sometimes never even knowing that they have anything causing the underlying issue. It can sometimes feel like a universal pattern, an uncontrollable deja vu, and at the end of the game, you are given no choice. You, the player, end up with the same result regardless. You go back in time, meet a different player character version of yourself, and coerce them into the box, having just escaped. The game will be concluded. It could be said that this approach to personifying a series of events that one has determined to spawn from oneself is an acknowledgement of determinism. The idea that nothing is predetermined. Things simply happen based on previous events, and thus one cannot predict or avoid the events that occur. No future insight, no grand plan actually exists. And with the Binding of Isaac, it could be also concluded that Edmund Macmillan possibly has this kind of thought process at best, and at worst, perhaps Edmund Macmillan has a certain level of disdain or even hate for religion at large. Perhaps he has worked out a sense of acceptance with the universe as it is, or as he perceives it, and the curtain will eventually fall. Based on the other interviews, it can be concluded that Edmund Macmillan has had a certain interpretation or understanding that he has held strong with his perception and how the universe works, and thus holds distrust for those who hold faith, especially Christian faith, as the determination for their lives. Along with the knowledge of how Time Fuck was inspired originally, it could be determined that Ed simply sees religion as a metaphysical box, self-imposed, with seemingly the only consequence the box itself, or rather the outside of the box. We all follow. It can be assumed, though not specifically said, that Macmillan no longer has quarrels with death, and has been drawing since a very young age the same grotesque death-inspired artwork, as stated in a clip.
In third grade, my teacher recommended that I be psychologically evaluated, because she thought I was mentally disturbed. My mom said that no, he's just an artist, he likes to draw. And she said that's not art, that's a cry for help.
He even dealt with trouble in school because of his art, which leads us back to the historic recurrence. Acknowledgement that many of these events seem to reflect much of his own childhood, with a divorce, parental drug use, and hyper-religious family members. It's as if much of Edmund Macmillan is the game and the art, simply repeating and working through tough moments of his childhood. We all want instruction and comfort. In this line, it's as if Edmund Macmillan gives a pass to much of these religious groups and his disdain for them, acknowledging that instruction is sometimes less scary than free will. In an interview that I'll link at the bottom, Edmund Macmillan even talks about much of his inspirations for the Binding of Isaac, and how he was in a terrible position while working on Time Fuck with a partner who probably referenced as the self-imposed villain of the game, oneself and one's own decisions. Yet it was a choice that both Stephen and Edmund Macmillan had chosen for one reason or another, perhaps as a misguided attempt to force Ed to focus on a single goal, perhaps to release a product to help sustain himself and his family. We are all stuck in repetition because it's simply easier than taking a risk and just not reading the text before you. Nearing the end of the dialogue, we see what seems to be a momentary lapse in obscurity, a moment of truth, not towards us, but maybe towards Edmund Macmillan himself, as if this whole game is a memento to his parents, his own life, or the world around him, his friends, his co-workers, still making the same mistakes that their parents made before them, and perhaps their parents before them. But the risk and fear and experience of failure on even Edmund's part makes it hard for him to burn the bridges that he must and build the bridges that he must, or to fully experience the dreams Edmund Macmillan himself wishes for. Please stop reading this. 4 words, simply put, more than likely directed, once again, to Edmund himself, as if the past version of himself is trying to warn a future version of himself to please stop putting me in the box. I want to be free. I want to be happy. Yet though he knows he's made this mistake before, he feels he is doomed to make it again, which we can watch the end of the game to find out that it will happen again. Although Bioshock pays homage to Ayn Rand in Atlas Shrugged, we can learn something from Ayn Rand, from the demented ways she and Andrew Ryan saw the world. Perhaps it's not a problem to live for someone else as long as that someone happens to be someone you love or care about, or at large, people that you don't want to see suffer, whether it be through poverty, starvation, torture, war, or anything else. Perhaps it can be as simple as allowing your dreams to inspire others and to also help them. It means nothing. Or perhaps it means nothing. Perhaps this is nothing more than a suicide note, or an understanding that the universe has no grand plan. A sort of cynical optimism, a desperate attempt to put into words an underlying sadness. The reset button, the one that involves Steve taking a pill and dying. Or perhaps it's my desperate attempt at finding meaning in making connections, still putting myself in the same box, or self-imposed time restraints as Edmund Macmillan. Perhaps I'm not reading anything more than what I feel is my lacking and finding solace in the words of another person. Perhaps the villain knows this, as future Steve can be seen telling the player the key to life is knowing that one day you are going to die. Who's to say? I know I have no grand meaning in the universe, just a couple goals that I wish to see through. About as much as the basic rules others set in place for you. And here we are, finally at the end. Altogether, it reads as follows. This wall of text means nothing. About as much as the basic rules others set in place before you. The more you read, the more you realize that you will follow any direction, regardless of the time spent doing so or eventual outcome. You are simply looking for answers, and even though you have been told there will be no answers here, you continue to read, following the basic rules set in place by the people around you. The path you're on will only lead to an end. The text will stop, the game will be concluded, and the curtain will eventually fall. We all follow. We all want instruction and comfort. We are all stuck in repetition because it's simply easier than taking a risk and just not reading the text before you. Please stop reading this. It means nothing. About as much as the basic rules others set in place for you. Thank you for tuning in. I'm sorry this was a mess, but hopefully, like you, perhaps I too can learn something from the dialogue in this game. As games have become a more prominent way of storytelling, there are many ways to convey deep philosophical and rhetorical information, suggestion, and opinion, I guess. And I hope that you continue this journey with me as it goes on. Until next time, remember Fcuk. The YouTube algorithm isn't going to like that. Not that it will give me money for using Death Grip's Annie Bonnie as the intro, but who cares? Welcome to a new series. What It All Means. A series where we try to get the full picture on certain beautiful moments in gaming. Well known or little known, doesn't matter.
Like